All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today on National Cannabis News with me, your host, Cassin. I'm so excited to be here covering the latest news with you today. If you've been watching my show before, you probably know the subject matter that we're going to cover, but let's go over it for all those that haven't been here before. So we're going to start at the top of the hour talking about cannabis busts from around the country and the world, common denominators that we're seeing there, and, why it's important for us to continue to remember that people are still going to prison for this plant, even if it is readily available in many states in the United States and in other countries. We're going to talk about what's going on Capitol Hill and how that might impact what's happening with cannabis law around the country. We'll take a little dip into what's going on in science right now, especially related to what's happening on Capitol Hill. And then we'll have a conversation about what's going on here in Michigan. I live in Michigan, so Michigan is important to me. If you are interested in other states, just reach out. I am always willing to talk about other states and do research in other states. I recently had a request for, hey, what's going on over here in Colorado, which is interesting given that it's been around, at least in the adult use market, for pretty darn long. I will try to cover that next week. And, I'm always up for Ask Me Anything. Feel free to come to the Twitch chat and ask me something. I will work to answer it as quickly as possible. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead, back up and start talking about these cannabis busts. In common conversation happens pretty often for me that I'll be talking to people and I'll say, yeah, so, recently there was a big pardon at the federal level. And 4,000 people who were not actually in prison were received leniency from the president for possession of cannabis as their crime at the federal level. And that was, pretty marvelous. Had never really happened before. Those people are still in the process of actually getting through that. And it kind of makes me sad to think that, a couple years later, those people are still waiting. But even sadder beyond that is the 30,000 plus people that are in federal prison for cannabis related crimes that no one talked about and that no one pardoned, and as no one's trying to pardon. And that is important. And I think that it's important for people to understand that it's not just possession that people go to prison for, although it is a majority of the arrests that are made for cannabis is for simple possession in the United States. But there are a lot of people who are still in prison are there for possession with intent to distribute. Or drug trafficking charges, moving products in and out of different states, bringing things from Canada into the United States, etc. These things are not simple possession charges, and so people have to stay in prison longer. In some cases, for life. And if that didn't just make you go, what? Let's say it again. There are people who are in prison for selling cannabis for the rest of their lives. A product that you can buy on Facebook, a product that in 38, almost 39 states now, you can buy at a dispensary for pretty routine and cheap prices, a product that might be rescheduled potentially under the future, but there are still people in prison today for selling to their neighbors, their family members, their communities for the rest of their lives, right? So it's important to think about that. Now, let's talk about some people who were recently arrested for this. We had some arrests this past week in the state of Washington and in Illinois. Common denominators here was cannabis plus other drugs plus guns. There's definitely been a crackdown on cannabis operators that also have guns in the past couple of months. And I say that because almost all of the ones that were reported that I was able to see included guns as part of the problem. And I say part of the problem because if you have cannabis and you have guns, even in states where things are lenient, the federal government is still looking at you. Oh, you have a gun. Guns are not allowed when you're also committing other crimes, and then people are getting in trouble for that. So watch out for the trifecta here, everyone. We don't need more people in jail for cannabis. It's hard enough to get the people who are already in jail for cannabis out. It's hard enough to deal with the almost 250,000 people who were arrested and prosecuted for cannabis crimes last year. We don't need there to be more than that. So be cognizant. Is cannabis legal where you are? Are you following the rules where you are? For instance, state of Michigan, cannabis has been legal for a long time. Not legal things. Selling cannabis without a license using cannabis in public. Also not legal. Having cannabis and guns. Okay, so if you're doing those things at the same time with cannabis, you could get in trouble. They would like you to get in trouble because apparently the police like to arrest people. They like to find people. And, you know, I say they like to because they could be doing other things, but they still continue to focus on this. And not only do they focus on this, but prosecutors just won a big case here in Michigan to continue to do that. Beyond that, we know that at the federal level, the Department of Justice, under the Biden administration, continues to say that cannabis users are danger to society and therefore should not be allowed access to guns, right? So these common denominators here are doubling down on, yeah, if you're consuming cannabis, growing cannabis, sharing cannabis up with, you know, your family, that you should not be able to have access to guns, which seems really un-American to me, but I might just think that Americans like guns. So who knows? I think it's important, though, that we have that conversation. I think it's also important as we move towards a new Trump administration that we consider, do we want things to stay the same as far as cannabis legislation and enforcement action is concerned? I think the answer is no. If you agree with me, now might be the time to tell the incoming Trump administration how you feel about it, right? Recently read in the news that there are people who think that Trump could unilaterally deschedule cannabis, make it legal across the United States, and leave it up to the states for states' rights without any legislation, because the DEA is responsible for this, and the DEA will report to Trump. Makes you wonder why the Biden administration did that instead of just asking for rescheduling. You know, if it was possible for Trump, does that mean it was possible for Biden? Does that mean it was possible for Obama and they just didn't? And why didn't they? Okay, I feel like that's a decent segue into what's going on Capitol Hill. I'm sure in my mind, everyone is paying attention to everything that's coming out of there that might have an inkling of focus on the cannabis industry. As I'm sure you guys know, Trump has started saying who he's nominating to do things. His chief of staff, prior lobbyist, prior public representative for cannabis company, seems to be cannabis friendly, has said as much in the past, right? His proposed attorney general had back in like 2021, 2022, not recently, okay, not 2023, not 2024, when it was still possible for him to do so, had been a co-sponsor for legislation to change the federal laws in the House of Representatives. I don't understand why he didn't do those things with other people who did do those things in 2023 and 2024. It would have been great to have a Republican co-sponsor for safe banking, for instance, or for the States' Rights Act that Nancy Mace was doing. It would be great to have more people on board with those things. He wasn't interested in those things the last couple of years, but he had been interested in those things in years past. So it's possible that perhaps he will decide that, yes, it is a good thing to stop prosecuting people across the country for cannabis crimes. I have my doubts, and I have my doubts because if that was the case, you would think that he would still be championing, or would have been championing, these things in the House the last 2 years, and he had not. I haven't been able to talk to him or ask him, but maybe I'll get to when I go to Washington, D.C. the next time. Another appointment, nomination that has been made is for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be able to come in and take over the Department of Health and Human Services, which includes all kinds of things. I feel like we'll talk a bit more about that in the science portion of today's stream. But there's been a lot said there, and there could be a lot done. I'd like to take a bit of a deeper dive into the people who have been called to testify at the rescheduling hearing that is scheduled for December 2nd. Now, on December 2nd, they're going to show up and they're going to tell the judge why they should be allowed to testify, and then be rescheduled for later next year. Okay. I feel like that's good. I wish that it was happening a little faster, but you know, that's courts in the United States. So here's the list. Let's just go over it. You know, so our friend Shane Pennington will be there. Law attorney, right there at the top of the list. Very excited that he'll be there. He has been pivotal as far as I can concerned. My opinion on this, in most, if not all, of the changes that we have seen to cannabis law in our country over the past 20 years. So thank you, Shane, for all of your good work, and we're glad to see that you're gonna be there representing people. Aaron Smith, good friend of mine, National Cannabis Industry Association CEO, and the illustrious Michelle Ruder-Freiberg will also be there for NCIA. I'm excited about that. You know, they've come out and said yes, they are going to do it. They have submitted the documentation that they needed to submit earlier this week, as the courts had requested. So you know, we know that at least one organization is going to be speaking out for small operators in licensed organizations and for overall federal legalization on December 2nd. Let's see here. There's Dr. Chad Colas of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Care. You know, that's exciting too. It's always good to have medical professionals talking to judges and giving good expertise. Let's see here. There is John Jones, the treasurer of the Cannabis Biosciences International Holdings, Robert Head, and Corey Birchman, for Victory, Hemp for Victory, which is, as far as I can tell, is an organization that works with veterans and hemp, which sounds pretty darn good to me. We've got Aaron Gorman Kirk coming in from the state of Connecticut. I know there are some people that watch my stream that are out of the state of Connecticut that are always asking crazy things. This is an ombudsman. I think this is good. Lewis, if you're watching, I want to know what you think, because, you know, when I think of Connecticut, I think of you. All right. We've got Ellen Brown coming in from Massachusetts Cannabis Advisory Board's Research Subcommittee. You know, they do a lot of stuff in Massachusetts and have for a while. It gets very scientific. Would be nice to see that. We've got Shanatha Lewis, the executive director of Veterans Initiative 22. I love that there is more than one veteran group on this list. I think you guys probably can appreciate that too. Let's see here. There's Nicholas Gurley, the president and CEO of the Doc app, which is great, plus his in-house counsel. Katie Green with Platinum Advisors for the Commonwealth Project. We've got R.A. Christianbaum from St. Michael's College, which a little bit of additional research here. We had talked about some work that had come out of this college about 10 shows ago. So always nice to see that. We've got Joe McGuire from the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. Always nice to see people who are their job is to test people for drugs. Yay. Talking about testing people for drugs. We've got Patrick Philbin representing SAM, also known as Smart Approaches to Marijuana, which one might consider the bane of legalization's existence, but you know, but all sides get to participate in this hearing. Okay? Okay? All right. At least we hope the judge allows all sides to participate in the hearing and not just prohibitionists. I think SAM is probably, well, maybe definitely in the top 3 prohibitionist organizations against marijuana in the country, if not the most. Okay, so we got Ronette Lev of the International Academy on Science and the impact of cannabis. You know, again, it is good to have scientists up here. In this case, they appear to be prohibitionists. You know, again, it's good to have all voices so that we can have a rational conversation about this with as much science and data and facts as possible, especially when you consider that maybe the last 50 years hasn't been based on facts. So I'm very hopeful that at least this first hearing and maybe the next couple of hearings on this will be based on science instead of based on politics, which is what it's been in the past. David Evans Sr. will be here for the Cannabis Industry Victims Educating Litigators Group, which appears to be a group that helps lawyers know how to sue people the right way about cannabis. You know, I never considered that they would need to be there. But hey, you know what? I don't know enough about their organization. More lawyers will only make things wordy enough so that no one will be paying attention until after when they're watching the stream, which is fine. And I assume that they will record it so that we can all like listen to it over and over again, but maybe they won't. You know, it is a hearing. Perhaps it won't be public. I'm under the impression that it is a public hearing, but you never know. We've got Dr. Kenneth Fenn, who is a drug rehabilitation specialist. I couldn't find any additional information about the kind of rehabilitation that he does, so I don't know if he's involved with harm reduction, for instance, getting people off opiates by using substitute substances like cannabis. Maybe not. We've got Jennifer Halmendi from the National Transportation Safety Board, who, if you guys have been around, if you're in Michigan and you're driving around and you're seeing those big boards, they're like, you should be driving with your headlights on, not high, or if you're reading the sign, don't drive high. Like all of those are all from their campaign to prevent people from driving while being stoned. So I think we probably can understand what she would be there speaking about. Then we've got Philip Drum, a doctor of pharmacy. Again, always nice to have people who know about the science. I assume that he knows something about the science. Let's see, Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers, who is currently still litigating to prevent the voter-approved measure to make medical cannabis legal in the state of Nebraska. I mean, he didn't manage to get it off the ballot. People voted. 70% said yes, and it's still in the courts, so this courts will still get to decide. And he's also going to be talking at this hearing, or at least he's gonna present himself to say why he thinks he should be talking at this hearing. Let's see here. They've got a police officer from the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. Of course, police always want to talk about cannabis. I recently had an opportunity to listen to a police officer speak and talk about how, it actually is a relief to not have to be arresting people all the time for smoking cannabis. But then on the flip side, there's lots of things that people expect people to be arrested for that they can't arrest people for any longer. Like, I don't know, selling drugs to kids or something like that. I don't actually know what they would want to arrest people for that they can't, but he implied that it was actually nice to have a state legal system where they could focus on other things that were more important. And I appreciate that. So you never know. They might not be prohibitionists in this case. Let's see here. We've got Marshall Fisher from the DEA, or from the Drug Enforcement Administration of Federal Narcotics Agents, which is, so that's DEA folks. I have to only think that they would be prohibitionists, because otherwise probably we wouldn't be under prohibition any longer. We've got Natalie Hardenbaum from the American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine. Again, always nice to have people show up to talk about what's happening here. Did a little bit of deep dive in this. This is more on industrial hygiene and worker safety, guys. So maybe, hey, actually we still want this to be illegal, because if people are illegal and they're using it, then, they might make poor decisions and hurt themselves at work. Or could be completely different than that. Who knows what she's going to have to say. We've got here Sue Tao from the Community of Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. I feel like the title there is pretty clear that that's a prohibitionist who will be speaking there. Kim Littman of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Why not every other member from every other state from the Bureau of Investigation? Who knows, but it's such is life. And the National Sheriff's Association, which I think probably is going to come out as in a prohibitionist stance. I know in past times they have definitely come out to say that, it's difficult to get funding if you can't just seize all the things from people who are smoking marijuana and sell it. Lots of fines and whatnot associated with that, but maybe they will come out and say something different. I read recently that for whatever reason, cops are sick of legislators, messing things up, and they think they could do a better job themselves. To which, of course, I want to respond, well, run for the legislature. Or, citizen petitions, perhaps. I don't know. There are ways for you to have control over the laws that govern your job if you wanted to do so. Okay, so that's a lot of people. I feel like the broad strokes is, there are plenty of people where it's not obvious from what they do and the statements they've made, whether or not that they would be for or against huge scheduling, whether or not they would be for or against descheduling, or if they really want no rescheduling or descheduling to happen at all. I think it's important for us to all be wondering about the people who have been selected by the DEA to represent all of us at this public hearing, because that's what we're really talking about here, is being represented by these select handful of people. These 25 individuals and organizations are going to represent all of us before the judge, for the judge to make the decision about whether or not rescheduling should be allowed or carried forward. Now, of course, there's lots of other things that could change, because by the time the hearing actually occurs, right, we'll be under a different administration. However, looking at this list, acknowledging the list, writing to people on this list, asking the people on this list for what you need, might be an opportunity to educate and to share your knowledge and your needs as a patient, as a cannabis consumer, as a cannabis producer, as a cannabis operator who's selling to other people, what needs to happen. And know that if you haven't, and you haven't thought about talking to the people that you know are prohibitionists and asking them to stop and why, and you haven't thanked the people who are out there fighting for your rights, that you should consider doing so, right? Expecting other people to show up on your behalf without any support, and expecting people to stop showing up to take away your rights without telling them to stop, is inappropriate. You should grow up. Learn to show up for yourself and for other people around you who can't show up for themselves. All right. So that's really what's been happening at Capitol Hill. Lots going to happen here with this hearing. I'm excited. I'm glad to have shared this list with you. I'm super glad that the list is public. I have already started reaching out to the people on this list. Clearly I'm an active member of the NCIA. I'm seriously glad that we have two, I'm just going to say it, legendary activists doing this. It's very important for them to be up there and to be having these conversations. If not for them, who would be speaking on our behalf? No one. That is the case, right? So, if you have only time to say thank you to these three people, Shane, Aaron, and Michelle, please do so, because they are going to get grilled on your behalf to try to make sure things can be more legal. And that is the truth. Whether anyone else on that list does so, I know those people are going to show up for me, and they're going to show up for you. And that's important, and it's important to thank them. Drake, you're straight. Thank you so much for joining us on the stream today. Drake says, thank you for fighting for us, Cassin. Hey, I'm always going to fight for us. I'm going to fight for consumers. I'm going to fight for patients. I'm going to fight for caregivers. I'm going to fight for our ability to be small operators and, not have to live under, the gaze of big pharma. Those things are important because access to this plant is important. Because nobody should have to go to prison for this plant, and people should be able to have access. And access means being able to grow in your own home. Access means, if you can't grow in your own home, being able to have your dollars be able to purchase the medicine that you need when you need it. Okay? That's what that means. Right, so let's talk a little bit more about science and the incoming potential. Yes, thank you, Drake, 100%. Big thank you to them. I am so glad that they're there. I am glad to know these people. These people they're doing God's work to make sure that you have access to this plant, okay? Thank you very much, Drake, for thanking them. I'm going to continue thanking them 100%. You better know they're getting care packages from me. Hopefully they will enjoy those care packages. All right, so what might we expect with Trump's nomination for United States Director of Health and Human Services, or Secretary of Health and Human Services? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is coming into this. Super interested in homeopathic medicine, not interested in pharmaceuticals, super interested in psychedelics, has talked about medical cannabis as being a solution in the past, really doesn't seem interested at all in what's happening with the National Institutes of Health and all the researchers there, which for me is a little frightening, because just when we finally got the MMR in place and we're able to do the research that we have been doing, that I've been reporting on week after week, now maybe we have somebody who wants to come in and say, yeah, none of that. None of that. We're getting rid of all of that. Maybe he'll get rid of all of that and replace with something even better. Who knows? He's never really been involved with NIH or science or research or any of that stuff before. So surprising to me that he would then be the head of a scientific division of the United States. But you know what? I think that's the way Trump likes to roll, right? He's always surprising us. He's always coming up with things that are going to shake everything up. And we have to wait and see if that shakeup is positive, negative, or, somewhere neutral and in the middle where not everybody is happy. And I will tell you, if the end answer is no one is happy with the outcome and we're all still alive, it's probably a good thing, right? Because if only one group of people was happy, something is probably wrong. Or if one group of people was really happy, probably something is wrong. So other things in there that I think is worthy of us having a conversation with about science. Guys, I know we have talked about this for, almost 6 months now, right? So the research that had been being done on cannabis that was other than on addiction was being done outside of the United States for the last 50 years. That research is now starting to come inside the United States. That research is now starting to be collaborations between the United States, the European Union, Israel, Australia, Thailand, right? We are starting to see the fruits of pulling back the constraints on research, and we want to do that more. So, another opportunity, right? Someone gets nominated, you can just be letting them know, hey, we really think that cannabis research is important. Let's make sure you leave that in, right? If you're deciding you want to get rid of everything else, leave that in. I know it sounds crazy that, hey, a new administration's not even in place yet, and we would start having these conversations. I say it's never too soon to educate. It's never too soon to reach out. You know how many letters I wrote to President Trump? I wrote a 1 letter a month saying, please help. Please help with cannabis law. Please help get these people out of jail. Right? Please help make it so that we don't have to worry about being patients and losing our rights and losing our freedom, right? You can do the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's President Trump. You could have been doing it this whole time with President Biden. I know I have. Having those conversations, letting them know what's going on is important. Okay? It's never too soon to start. I can remember doing the same thing with the incoming Biden administration. I can remember doing the same thing with the Biden campaign before he was even elected to be president, saying, hey, don't forget about these things. These things are also important. Why aren't you talking about these? Why aren't these part of your policy conversations? Why aren't you making promises about cannabis? And guess what happened? Now, I'm not saying it was me that made it happen, but I start writing this. I'm sure other people start writing this. And guess what he did? He made promises that he was going to work towards rescheduling. He was going to work towards medical cannabis in the United States. And guess what happened? Rescheduling, right? The hearing is going to happen before he leaves office. The first hearing is going to happen before he leaves office. Right? Seems like a promise made. Now, Trump didn't make any promises about cannabis, which I'm still sad about because he had an opportunity to do so multiple times. He did say that he was for safer banking, which I can get on board with. I think we could all be happy about that. Matt Gaetz in the past was for safer banking, so maybe he will be on board with it as well. Right? Robert F. Kennedy Jr., hadn't really ever talked about that too thoroughly, right? So, looking like there are some bright, far down the tunnel lights, right? Because we still have, 6 weeks until the new administration takes over for things that could change in the U.S., and I'm happy about that, and I hope other people are happy about it too. Okay, so now let's talk about what's going on here in Michigan. I feel like it is important to say every single week that we still have no draft rules. We still have no draft rules. We have a summary for draft rules. We have statements of what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, I have to say, we haven't had new rules since 2021. That is almost 3 years. Okay? No new rules. Probably not going to have these draft rules by the end of the year. Might be next year. Right? What is going on? Why is it taking so long? I get it. Director Hanna came out and said that they rewrote the whole thing. Okay, so I can understand that it would take a long time because you had to rewrite the whole thing. Right? But why not rewrite it in segments? Right? Why not rewrite it in segments? Right? So, let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the draft rules are going to include from the regulators, but we have no draft rules. Okay, so now let's talk about what the dra You know, and why not let us all see it so we can all be thinking about how you're going to completely upset the apple cart? Because let's be real, the apple cart is being upset regularly with the currently existing rules that we have all had like 5 years to get used to. And let's speak a little bit more about that. So the disciplinary report for last month came out. Guys, at the top of the list, metric noncompliance, followed directly on by failure to report material changes. Literally, failure to fill out a piece of fucking paper that is 1 page long. 1 page long. It is a PDF that you can fill in very simply. It only takes a single signature. It doesn't even have to be notarized. 9 people failed to fill this fucking form out and submit it. And got formal complaints because of it and had to pay fines. What the hell is going on out there, licensed operators? Right? A lot of general operation issues, which covered everything from like not having an appropriate break space for employees to having employees on staff that you shouldn't have on staff because you have the right documentation for them, to not being able to handle your waste correctly. And there was a lot of stuff going on there. All right, but let's talk a little bit more about metric noncompliance. You know, I do help people with metric from time to time. I see basically every place I go is not compliant. They're not compliant based on my understanding of the disciplinary reports, but there's really not a clear definition of how people are supposed to use metric consistently. When I see things like, okay, someone got a metric noncompliance write-up for not entering clones as plants in the medical facility on the day the clones arrived. Okay, which, I mean, okay. Maybe they expect things to be immediate and not, you know, sometime soon. There was a case where a point of sale system put a sale into the system that was wrong. It was immediately fixed within a few minutes, which I like to call as resolved quickly. But the agency still didn't like it. Even though the person had not actually done anything wrong, this was literally a computer error, such as life, they received a formal complaint. There was one where people were clearly doing work and their day ended. They stopped doing the work. They left. They came back the following morning and finished the work in less than 24 hours of having to do the work. And because they didn't do the work within that, you know, immediate contemporaneous period of time, the agency wrote them up. It was a $5,000 fine. In one case, there was a facility that had received a bunch of plants, hung the plants to dry, took the plants down to dry. The plants are now no longer, so the plants had been chipped for bucking, dried but not yet trimmed, and the totes that they had been put into did not have metric tags on them yet. Should have been tagged, I guess, that day. Were not tagged until the following week when trimming was completed. You know, these are just examples, guys, of non-compliance things. Now, there is nothing in any of the rules that say things have to be done within 24 hours or contemporaneously or immediately. In fact, the statute, which I love, it says that there will be a state tracking system and that operators will maintain inventory. I did nothing in that statement about how inventory is maintained, not even that it's got to be in metric, nothing about how tags are used, nothing about how tags are attached, nothing about when things have to be done, right? So, you know, always think that's interesting. There was another one where the chain of custody documents did not match metric. So metric said this is when things happened. Pieces of paper said, no, those things happened to different days. And, you know, usually what happens is you come in and metric's wrong, but your documentation's right. But in this case, metric was right, your documentation was wrong, but you're still getting written up for it, right? Okay, so what is the moral of that story? All right, one, why is this what the regulator is worried about? Okay, material changes, which, you know, is things as simple as people had installed doors in the wrong places. And, you know, not filing paperwork when somebody had appointed a new person to their board, was also issues, right? Operational issues, you know, not having appropriate employee documentation, for instance. Like, my question is, if the mandate is to make sure consumers are safe, how did any of this help with that? The answer is it doesn't. It has nothing to do with consumer safety, right? All of these rules that have been created are not keeping us more safe. They're not keeping traditional market product out of schools, right? They're not, they're not helping with age gating. They're not making sure that products are what they say they are. They're not making sure that the tests that we're actually required to perform are the tests that are actually necessary to be performed. None of those things are captured by this. I think for me, that is the thing that frustrates me the most when I see the disciplinary reports. Because clearly there are rules that people are not following. The rules are not easy to follow. The rules are not easy to understand. The interpretation of the rules are broad depending on who you're working with at the agency, which we all know is the case, right? And, again, are any of these things, related to consumer safety? No. The answer is no. And that's frustrating for me because I think the most important thing that should be coming out of our cannabis regulating agency is that consumers are safe, that patients are safe in the state of Michigan, right? And none of these items cover issues that are related to that. Even the non-compliant sales, which, by the way, wow, right? So, literally, point of sale systems suck in the state of Michigan, and it causes problems with Metric all the time. One should assume that the agency is aware of this, but it doesn't matter. If you can't manage to figure out how to force your point of sale system to work, or if you don't have the time or the money to pay someone to check it all the time to make sure that the automatic system is working correctly, you will receive a fine for this. It's frustrating for me as a person who works with Metric. I know it's frustrating for lots of licensed operators. Drake Detroit has asked, when are we going to see some of the rules, and why do I think that there's such a delay when clearly they said that we should see them by now? So I don't really know why there's such a delay. I 100% thought that we would see them in October. We are in November. There's no hope on the horizon as far as seeing those. Occasionally, I think it was because, it's in the legislature and they were in the middle of election cycle. And, there were a lot of people who were fighting to, retain their seats. Some of whom did, some of whom did not. I know I hit on this sometimes. And I know cannabis is super important to me. It's clearly important to people who are here watching a news show about cannabis. Cannabis is not important to most people, right? We don't have a lot of champions for cannabis in the federal government. One of our champions, Earl Broomhauer, is retiring. This is his last year, right? He's just been replaced. He's been replaced by a person who we don't even know if they like cannabis. I cannot tell you, and I think anybody who has gone to Washington, D.C. or is here in Lansing talking to legislators, so many times they know nothing. They've never seen a cannabis plant. They certainly don't know licensed operators. They aren't cannabis consumers. They are, they know what they learned in DARE, which was lies when they were children. That's what they know. And so there's a lot of educational stuff that has to happen. Because there's a lot of educational stuff that has to happen, people just don't care. It's not important to them. What might be more important to them are the things that are happening, right? The House came back from the election. They're a lame duck, and they passed a lot of legislation this past week, none of which had anything to do with cannabis, right? So, when do I think that we're going to see them? I think at this point, I don't think we're going to see them at the remaining of the lame duck. So that means we're going to see them after they're set next year. So probably sometime at the end of January, early February, if then. I'm not holding my breath. I'm thinking, by March of next year at this point, since we didn't see anything prior to the election in October. That's when I was hoping we would see things. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll see them sooner. It would be nice, but, I don't have any control over that, clearly. Otherwise, we'd already have them, and we would already have commented, and they already would have changed them based on the comments that they got from actual licensed operators like myself and others that are out here listening today. So I think that there's that. And I feel like as well that the delay might also be about the fact that they are talking about changing the laws here in Michigan, which would mean the rules would then have to be rewritten. So I think we might actually be waiting until someone decides if we're actually going to change these rules. I know I haven't talked about it for a minute because, it hasn't really been coming up on the docket, but it was a bill that was introduced. Doesn't look like it's going anywhere this year, which is probably good news because it's got some issues with the way it's written right now, to merge the MMFLA for medical license holders and MRTMA. for adult use license holders into one document. When that happens, many of the rules, not all, but many of the rules will change based on that legislation, which would mean we would immediately go into where the rules were no longer aligned with the statutes, which no one wants, right? No one wants to see that, right? So it's possible that there's some of that happening as well. Lucky for us, the people who are interested in making sure licensed operators have a voice in Lansing were reelected in this past election. They are still there. They're still potentially fighting for us. There's not that many of them, right? So, sad news there. Okay, so that's what I've got about Michigan, guys. We've talked about lots of other things. Here's an opportunity, the last 15 minutes or so of the hour. If anybody has any other questions for Ask Me Anything, if you want to, you can always email me. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. You can hit me up on Twitch. You can hit me up on my YouTube channel. Just, if you have questions, you're interested in finding out things about cannabis news, that'd be good. I am looking for one more person to come fill out the Patreon survey. So I'm looking for 10 people to have answered it. And then, I will look to see if there are more subjects that I should be talking about. Right now, it looks like people are interested to have a segment on cannabis genetics, which, as you may or may not know, is a subject near and dear to my heart. I recently got to try a really good blueberry muffin. Wow. It was tasty. It was like having fucking blueberry pancakes at IHOP or something. And then it totally made me sleep, which was good. It's nice to sleep really good sometimes. So thank you, all the Cannabis Gift Fairy. I'm appreciative of the substances that I'm receiving. On the second hand there, guys, I'm not one for consuming live. I am not one. Apparently, I am not the most pleasant human being to be around when I'm consuming cannabis, so I usually try to do those things solo. Or maybe I just, I always feel like I'm always honest and straightforward and blunt, but perhaps I can be even more honest and straightforward and blunt, and so much so that one might call it rude if I am consuming cannabis. That's what I've heard. So maybe not the best thing for a live stream, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk about the plant, we can't talk about the genetics, we can't talk about things that we like, we can't talk about medical information that's been provided by them, we can't talk about survey data that's out there about them. We can talk about the lineage and what parts of the world they came from. I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a recent documentary that just came out about Afghanistan and how this place that we probably all consider as not a place for a bunch of people to be running around smoking a lot of weed is a bunch of people running around smoking a lot of weed. Right? Because, there's a lot of plants that are land races that came out of Afghanistan, right? Just a lot, actually. So you can talk about what that looks like. We talk about different color things. There was one person who requested that I would talk about nutrients. I don't know how interested people are going to be about that, but I tell you, I answer questions about nutrients online semi-regularly. So, if you have questions about nutrients and you're like, hey, my leaf looks like this, send me a picture of how your leaf looks. I will show it on the stream, and I will tell you what I think it is based off my last, decade plus of experience with this plant, growing it and watching myself and others screw up horribly with nutrients, lighting, other environmentals, and pest issues. I think a lot of times I see issues, people don't even realize they have pests, and they definitely do, right? I mean, if your leaves have holes in them, guys, something is eating the leaf. Sorry, that reminds me of a meme I saw recently that had a woman who had really fancy houseplants, and all of the houseplants that she saw at other people's houses had holes in the leaves. And she thought the plant needed to have holes in the leaves, and so she was cutting the holes in the leaves. And then she was sad because then the leaf would die and get brown around where she cut it. But her plant was healthy. It didn't have any pests. The other people's plants were being eaten. Hey, no, you don't know until you know, okay? Okay, that's just how it is. All right, I haven't received any questions from anybody yet, so let's just go ahead and remark on making sure that people think about talking to the Trump administration today, right? He is easy to write to. It's easy to tweet to him, right? It's not difficult. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can do it with an email, which is basically free. You can write a handwritten note, which, you know, is going to cost you less than $1 probably. You know, let him know how you feel about cannabis. And if you're like, why would I ever write to President Trump about something he doesn't care? You know what? He probably doesn't care until you ask him to care. Right? You know, certainly if you don't ask him, you know, he can't even tell you no. Right? So I'm still waiting for him to respond to any of the letters that I send him. I am certain that one day he will. I know he responds to lots of other people. One day I will get a response back. And, you know, I will frame that shit just like I have for other presidents who have responded to my inquiries. So let's go ahead and talk about next week, guys. Next week, we're hopeful to be, again, talking to Brandy Zink. Really looking in on what Americans for Safe Access here in Michigan is doing and what it looks like for patients coming forward and how we want to be engaged. Again, if you are not paying attention and you are a patient right now, your rights have not been guaranteed because the omnibus has not been passed. We want that to happen before the end of the year. They have kicked it down, so that doesn't have to happen until December with, you know, some kind of weird legislative hand waving. But that is important, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the things we just talked about on Capitol Hill and how they impact patients. Hopefully she will be here and we'll be able to do that. If you are listening and you are interested in being on the show and talking about something with me, please reach out. I am always interested in bringing more people on. It is important to me that I have an inclusive stream that includes people from all walks of life and even people who disagree with me. So yes, I mean even people who disagree with me. All right, so I hope that you guys have a really great rest of your Friday, and I look forward to seeing you next week. See you.